we're a couple of races into the 2022 season, and we're starting to get an idea of the pecking order of the current F1 grid. So it's that time of year again where I'm going to make my 2023 driver lineup predictions. Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. As always with these types of videos, I have to put in the disclaimer at the beginning of the video to say that yes, these are my opinions. You probably won't agree with me, and that's okay. Let me know your opinions in the comments, but do try your best to be nice about it. Ferrari. First up is Ferrari, and this team for me will stick with their driver lineup. We all know the situation Ferrari have put themselves in by signing Carlos Sainz for 2021. The team have created a driver lineup that's potentially unrivaled on the F1 grid, so the team would be fools to give that up. Having said that, they also have a young talent on the F1 grid in Mick Schumacher. And if Schumacher was to race in a Ferrari, there would be a massive opportunity from a commercial perspective. But personally, I don't think that 2023 is the time to change that driver pairing, after what's looking like it could be the most successful season for Ferrari in over a decade. It'll be fascinating to see how this pairing develops over 2022. Last season they worked really well together, and it seemed like they had a positive partnership. This was one of the reasons why Ferrari were able to get third in the championship last year. But at the same time, if there's a world championship on the line this season, then it could result in the relationship between the two drivers souring as they compete with each other at the front. It feels like it could go a similar way to Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton, but I still believe they're the right two drivers to continue with Ferrari for 2023 and probably beyond. Haas. And that leads me nicely on to Haas. And I think they won't look to change either for 2023. They've made a significant upgrade to their driver lineup for this season, replacing Mazepin with Magnussen, and I don't see a reason for them to change anytime soon. They're a Ferrari customer team with close links to Maranello, so I expect Schumacher will stay put with them from that perspective as the German driver continues to develop in the sport. This season is very important for the young Haas driver though, as he's always performed better in his second year, and now it looks like he has a car that's certainly capable of scoring points on a regular basis. His benchmark against Kevin Magnussen is also an excellent opportunity, as the Danish driver is a known entity in the sport, and so having an experienced driver to learn from and a reference point to see how good Schumacher really is going to be an interesting point to watch this year. Magnussen himself has had a strong start to the season, and in my view, he was unlucky to lose his F1 seat in the first place. At the age of 29, he certainly still has some years left in the sport, so there's no reason for the team not to keep hold of the Danish driver, in my opinion. McLaren. Next up is a team that isn't having the same fortunes as Haas this season, and that's McLaren. I don't think the team's driver lineup will change after what looks like it could be a tough year. Norris is tied into a long-term contract with the team and looks like he's keen to stick with McLaren, and Norris is a driver that does have time on his hands, so he'll be happy to be there through the rebuild. Daniel Ricciardo though might have a different opinion, after making what seems like another poor career move as he gambled on McLaren being head of Alpine for these new regulations, and on the face of it, that gamble has backfired. There is of course a long season to go, but I think Ricciardo will stick with McLaren for now unless an opportunity arises elsewhere. But for me, I think it's unlikely that it will be the first choice for some of those other teams if a seat was to become available. Before we take a look at Mercedes next, I want to ask you to consider subscribing to Behind the Drive. I'm aiming for 50,000 subscribers by the summer break, so if you haven't already, it would be great if you could support the channel and subscribe. Thanks. Mercedes. Similarly, I can't see there being a change at Mercedes. The Mercedes team have also had a tough start to these new regulations, but both drivers are showing their support to the team as they try to resolve their porpoising problems. Like McLaren, both Mercedes drivers are contracted to 2023, and for George Russell, I think there's no reason for him to consider leaving the team. He's worked for a really long time to find his way into this Mercedes seat, and he won't want to consider any alternative options anytime soon. Hamilton, though, is a driver that's at a very different point in his career. He's a 7-time world champion, and outside of the sport, he's laying the foundations for his future beyond Formula 1. But after such a successful career, it's hard to believe that Hamilton would want to leave in these circumstances. He's keen to win that 8th title, an achievement that would make him the most successful F1 driver in nearly every metric. So for me, I don't see Hamilton leaving, as he'll want to leave the team on a high. Red Bull. There's a lot of talk about the Red Bull driver lineup. Sergio Perez did a great job in 2021 with performances that won Verstappen the Drivers' Championship, all whilst he was in the first year with the Red Bull team. At the same time, many believe that Red Bull could have won the Constructors' Championship in 2021 if they had a stronger driver lineup. Many compare the performance of Sergio Perez to Daniel Ricciardo, considering that's the driver that they've spent 3 long years trying to replace. For me, as you may have seen in the video I made comparing the Red Bull options in that seat over the last few years, I think they wouldn't want to replace Sergio Perez. Many people are talking about the Pierre Gasly option, but we all know that there are huge risks associated with bringing the French driver back to the team. His short stint with them in 2019 undoubtedly came too soon in his career, and I have no doubt that he could perform better than he did in that half season. But it's a level of risk that Red Bull will be reluctant to take, especially given the risk of making the same mistake twice. So I don't think it's a viable option for Red Bull at this stage. Keeping Sergio Perez is probably their best bet, and from an early stage of the 2022 season, it seems like this year's Red Bull car is suiting his driving style much better already. So for that reason, I think he'll stay. And of course, Max Verstappen will stick around at Red Bull. He's recently signed a contract with the team that will run until 2028, so I've no doubt that he'll continue to compete with that team beyond this season. They look like they have a car that will be able to compete for race victories and the championship, so surely Verstappen will be up there once again this year. So it's no change for Red Bull for 2023. Alpha Tauri. This then brings me nicely onto Alpha Tauri, and this is where I've made my first change to the 2023 driver lineups. I've already discussed the importance of Pierre Gasly and that he's a far improved driver compared to when he previously went to Red Bull in 2019, but I think taking him on is a level of risk that the top team don't need to take and will be reluctant to take despite the obvious talent Gasly has. So the question is whether Gasly stays at Alpha Tauri or goes elsewhere, and for me, I'm going to keep him at the Red Bull Junior team. And the reason for this is because of mistakes that Red Bull have made in the past. They didn't have an obvious alternative when Ricciardo left the team in 2018, and that's what caused this mess in the first place. But if one of their drivers was to leave, Gasly is a prepared replacement. So I think he'll stay. But at the same time, Gasly will be undoubtedly looking for where his next option could be on the F1 grid, especially if he doesn't make it to Red Bull for 2023. So I think he'll be looking out for alternative options, but none will be better than his current spot at Alpha Tauri, so I believe they'll keep hold of him for next season. It's a really tricky decision though, as there may be long-term benefit to Gasly trying to find a move to a Mercedes-powered team, with the long-term view of taking Lewis Hamilton's seat at the top team there following his retirement, which is likely just a few years away. But for now, I think he'll stick with the team that's enabled him to win a race and score multiple podiums over the last few seasons, and keep himself well within the shop window. So for there to be a change in this driver lineup, Yuki Tsunoda will need to move on, and I believe that dropping the Japanese driver would be tough on him, because he is very young and improving very quickly. He could of course have an excellent season and still keep his seat if he's able to compete with his teammate, but you have to consider the AlphaTauri team to have a benchmark in Gasly, who's a known entity and very talented driver. If Tsunoda ends up a similar way behind the Frenchman as he did last year, then I think it will be the end of the road for him, as it has been for so many Red Bull-backed drivers. As for his replacement, well, just looking to the F2 grid, there are 5 drivers that could all potentially get into those all-important top 3 spots. Liam Lawson is likely to be high on the team's radar as he had an excellent season in DTM in 2021, racing alongside Alex Albon, and he should have won that title. He's also had a good start to this year's 2022 F2 season, but in my opinion his main competitor for this seat is Dennis Hauger, the young F3 champion who's got a seat at the Prema team alongside fellow Red Bull Academy driver Jehan Daruvala. Having said this, the Norwegian season so far has been a bit disappointing, albeit from just 2 rounds, and he may need more time in that feeder category. There are other options including Yuri Vips, Jehan Daruvala and Ayumu Iwasa, but for the purposes of this prediction, I'm going to go for Liam Lawson to make the step up to Formula 1 to compete alongside Pierre Gasly. Williams. The next team on this list is Williams, and this is a tricky one as it looks like they'll have a challenging 2022 season. Williams have changed their driver lineup for this season, with Albon joining the team, and I think he'll likely stay for 2023. Generally speaking, when drivers get a second chance on the F1 grid, they tend to do well and deliver on expectations. Albon also creates a link between Williams and Red Bull, so perhaps that team could end up with Red Bull powertrains in the future. Nicholas Latifi is a driver that has likely only kept his seat for this season on the basis that the team will have wanted some continuity between last year's driver lineup into this year's. Team principal Jos Capito commented that the team are no longer dependent on the money that he brings in as a pay driver, so he kept that seat on merit for 2022. For me, the Williams team have limited alternative options. There's Nick de Vries, a driver who'll likely be left without a drive after Mercedes leave Formula E at the end of this season, and a driver that was rumoured to be an option for the team to replace George Russell. The team could also look within, as Logan Sargent is part of their junior academy, but I don't think he's quite at the level that the team would need, at least not in this stage of his career. So for me, I'm sticking with Nicholas Latifi for that Williams seat alongside Alex Albon once again for 2023. I don't see the team having a great season, and so both drivers are probably the strongest that they could get for the rebuild job that will follow this year. Alfa Romeo. Alfa Romeo next, and this team took a risk with their 2022 driver lineup, with Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu being a full team swap. From the early stages of the 2022 season, Bottas has hit the ground running, with a strong point-scoring finish in Bahrain and 2 brilliant qualifying performances where he's got his car into the top 10. What Bottas is doing is showing how good that Alfa Romeo car is. On top of this, he has a multi-year deal with the team, which he says is a factor in his performance as he's more comfortable with his longevity in the sport. So I'm sure Bottas will stay for 2023. Zhou Guanyu is a driver that's important for Formula 1 as the first ever Chinese driver. I have to say I was impressed with his debut performance in Bahrain as he got himself a top 10 finish. Seems like he has a good relationship with his teammate, and I'm sure he'll improve through the year. So he is a talented driver, and his sponsorship backing will likely be a big difference for the team. But with the team's performance improving, if the gap between Bottas and Zhou continues to be quite large, there'll be a question over whether the team actually need this financial backing from Zhou. The Sauber Driver Academy has a driver that's ready and waiting for Formula 1. Théo Pourchaire is a talented young driver who won Formula 4 in 2019, came second behind Oscar Piastri in F3 in 2020, and then came fifth in F2 last year, despite some significant bad luck. This year, Pourchaire could well be one of the favourites to win the championship, and he did indeed win the first feature race in Bahrain. It's surely only a matter of time before the French teenager makes it onto the F1 grid, and I think he could well make the step up next season. Alpine. Next up is Alpine, and this is where I'm starting to look at a driver who might potentially retire at the end of the 2022 season. Esteban Ocon is contracted to Alpine for another couple of years, and I don't see him going anywhere, given he's doing well and the Renault team gave him a lifeline he needed to recover his F1 career. But Fernando Alonso is a driver whose future is not quite so certain. His return to the F1 grid was a roll of the dice to see whether the team that won him his 2 world championships could deliver again and win him a 3rd title in 2022 with the new regulations. Given where they are this year, this doesn't seem likely. But Alpine have made a good step forward and are probably the 4th or 5th fastest team on the whole. But is that really enough for the Spaniard? He's undoubtedly a driver that loves racing in Formula 1. After all, he returned to Formula 1 at the age of 39 and will be 41 at the end of his 2-year contract. But if there isn't an opportunity to win races or championships, will he really want to stay? The other factor in the Alpine driver lineup decision is their junior driver Oscar Piastri, who is absolutely a talent that is ready for Formula 1 and deserving of a seat. The Australian driver is waiting in the wings, and from the Alpine team's perspective, they need to decide whether they want to bring in a driver who could be there for a number of years, or if they still want a driver from the older generation. For me, with Ocon doing so well and potentially in a position to lead the team going forwards, I think bringing Piastri into the sport is exactly what they'll do. Aston Martin. And then the final team to look at is Aston Martin, and this team's in a similar position to Alpine in that they have an older driver in Sebastian Vettel. Vettel hasn't even raced this year so far following his COVID-19 diagnosis before the first race, and the question everyone is asking is whether the German driver is really missing his spot on the F1 grid. I'm worried that Vettel won't have been missing his F1 drive as much as he might have done just a few years ago, especially when watching his teammate and substitute trail round towards the back of the grid. It's a real concern, and realistically this season Vettel will be fighting for just a handful of points. He's also unlikely to be competing for podiums anytime soon. So is that enough to keep him on the grid? I have my doubts. As for his teammate, Lance Stroll, he's guaranteed his seat in Aston Martin, and we all know why that is. And to be honest, he's becoming a strong asset in that team. Personally, the next stop for Stroll is to improve his consistency to get to that next level and challenge his teammates. So the question is regarding Vettel, And if he was to go, who would be lined up to replace him? The Aston Martin team is one with significant financial backing, and I think the seat that Vettel took from Sergio Perez is one that they're willing to invest in. But can the team attract a top quality driver given their current position in the pecking order? There's part of me that thinks Pierre Gasly could be convinced if he looks at the longer term Mercedes option. But for these predictions, I've kept him at Alfa Tauri for 2023. It means that there are a couple of potential choices left, one of these being Nico Hülkenberg, the team's stand-in driver. But alternatively, the team could speak to Mercedes and Nick de Vries could be an option for Aston Martin as well. But for me, I think looking sideways to Nico Hülkenberg could be their best bet. The German driver has delivered performances at the standard of Lance Stroll when he stepped in the early part of this season, and he actually finished ahead of the Canadian driver in the physically demanding Saudi Arabia race. He's a known entity and could be in a good position to support the team with their car development long term. So it will be Lance Stroll partnered with Nico Hülkenberg at Aston Martin for me. So there you have it, my 2023 driver lineup predictions, with some interesting shifts in the lineup for next year. I'm looking forward to seeing how things actually shape up for next season as the year develops. Let me know what you think about my predictions in the comments and which ones you'd change.